Councilmember Boyd notified us ahead of time she was not going to be able to be with us. So present are council members Owen, Stanley, Anderson, and Jensen. And we also have some of the members of our newly formed Public Safety Building Committee over here on the right. If you want to introduce yourselves so that everybody knows who you are.
Jason, do I need to say my address?
No.
Jason Hunter.
Larry Nelson.
Christy Belton.
Jan Van Orman.
Molly Andrew.
Andrea Snow.
And Brian Williams.
Great, thank you. And there's a total right now of, it's 16. There should be 6. So we're shy 2 people on the neutral committee.
There's several on the way there.
Are they coming?
Yeah, just so Steve and Jill, I think it's on the way.
Okay. Rather than proceed, I would prefer to just wait for a couple of minutes because I think that the content of what Ron Collins is going to present to us is fairly, and I don't want to have people that need to hear this be left behind. So if you guys are okay with that, just we'll take a little recess here. So I'm going to mute my mic and we're going to go into recess until we get more of those members here. Thank you. Frank? You want to sit over here? There's plenty of rooms up here. More seats.
I don't. Frank sit right here right now. He has to work with me for
Is that else here for public safety? Pardon? The alternates, right. The alternates should be over here as well. Come on, Randy. This is good. We got most people here. That is really good. All right, I think the seats are now full, right? So anybody else that comes, just find a place to sit. All right. With that, Scott, you want to go ahead and tee it up?
Sure. A few months ago, we had discussion as a city in regards to getting some information on 4 buildings in our community as to seismically how good they are, if they're useful, a way that we can model them, use them, getting them up to a seismic condition in order to do that. We went through an RFP process and hired Bowen and Collins to do that analysis. That analysis includes the fire station, which also includes this building here, what we call community development. You see information and numbers and things like that, that includes both these buildings. The old rec center, the old seminary building, right next to the old rec center, and then we call the Beck home, which is on the corner there of Center and First East, right by the library. So they've done the analysis on this. They have created a draft report. They're here to present the report to the city council. There'll be a time, I think, once during the report, probably after the report, lots of questions. It's technical in nature, as we've, and hopefully answer questions, give people an idea for what we have in front of us in regards to these buildings. Is there anything else I'm missing?
There's no action to be taken.
Yeah, we're not taking any action. This is really a little bit of input, because then I think we will create a final report when it's all said and done that will be delivered to the city. Let me introduce Stephen Cohen with Bowen and Collins, who will probably be doing most of the speaking. I don't know. And Dave, I can't remember your last name. Dave Triplett, the architect, and sorry, CRSA architectural firm. These are the two that put the report together. So with that, I will turn it over to Stephen. And let him take it.
Well, I can't talk sitting down very good, so I'm gonna come out here and, yeah, there we go. That worked, the good in the bottom, okay. Okay, first, thank you again for giving us the opportunity to do this study for you. We appreciate that.
Do you want to go to the podium and then more people can see back there, or do you need to be right here?
It works.
Okay, yeah.
So
That might
you're
go
my,
more neutral, yeah. We can get you a mic.
okay. Nah, I like you.
Okay, you're fine.
But it's been a fun study to do. We've been doing it, and hopefully we've got information that we can prepare and share with you. That'll be useful in helping you to make your decisions what to do with these 4 buildings in your community. Now, I just showed this. The end result, we're gonna end up spending a lot of time at the end talking about this table. And just review, but we'll come back to the cost table a little bit later in a lot of detail, because we need to give you a good explanation for where the dollars came from and how you can use those in your budget. Part of this study was to perform a seismic analysis. Again, this was done as we use FEMA 154, which is rapid visual screening process.
Sorry. They can't see you very good.
Oh.
You stand right there, so.
Okay,
So we have them stand over there?
yeah.
Oh, wait, maybe that.
See if I can get out of the way.
You can move any of those chairs.
Okay.
You're still in the,
They're
you're
not
still
gonna
in
be able
those.
to stand behind this block.
You're gonna block them.
Block that screen.
You want to go out in the hall, get down the street.
Okay, how does that work?
That
Okay.
one's-
All right. We used, again, backing up, we used FEMA 154, which is a rapid visual screening process. It's a nationally recognized standard that's used all over the country. In fact, the military uses it also for screening of buildings. So that way to get into it, get to the nuts and bolts building without actually doing structural calculations, and something that we can do very rapidly. In the end of it, what we do is we end up putting it into a grading system, and without going into any detail, and we kind of knew this going into any building that's built before the 60s is going to pretty much fall in this category. But at the end of the day, we rated all 4 buildings. Get the wrong button there. We rated all 4 buildings as being poor. That's probably no surprise. Poor, it means that in a major earthquake, it would have significant structural and non-structural damage. Has appreciable life safety hazards if the building's occupied during that major earthquake. It should be considered a high priority if you're going to building. And but then they do give an option here that you can look at other abatement programs, reduction of occupancy. And when they talk about it, it could be, for example, me and Dave Triple worked years ago up at Utah State on the Utah engineering, my engineering lab building. That was when I was going to school. I lived in that building, much to the, my wife didn't like me up there as much as I was, but I was up there quite a bit. But we did a seismic study on the building. The building was an old steel frame. It would do maybe fair in an earthquake, but the cladding all the way around the building was bad. It would fall off in a major earthquake. And so one of the things was, if you're not going to seismically regulate, the answer to that building was, well, get the sidewalks away from the edge of the building, put landscaping around the edge of the building so that no one can sit next to the building, and all students can sit out in the lawn. You don't want them up, and keep them away from the edge of the building, so if the cladding falls off, no one's there. So this abatement programs can mean lots of different things. But that's, without going into a lot of detail, that's where all the buildings sit seismic. What I do now is we're going to address each building individually. We'll address, first of all, the seismic parts, and then Dave's going to address the life safety and architectural accessibility issues for each building. We'll those And we're trying to go through these fairly rapidly. We're not gonna spend a lot of time but I think you'll get the basics. And then if you have questions, stop us, okay? So we start off with the fire station, the community. I left the development offices off there, but the community offices. The 1950s construction, you can tell this is classic. You see it with the bowstring trusses that are on it. Real popular for this time and era for this building. Talk about efficiencies from a seismic viewpoint. Now, as we go through this list and we go from building to building, you're going to see that this list pops up again and again. Each building has slight differences, but so some of the stuff I'm going to explain quite a bit in for the station, but it's applicable to the other buildings. Okay, first of all of these buildings, they have what we call URM. URM is unreinforced masonry for the buildings. Unreinforced masonry buildings, they lack the structural strength to resist earthquake forces. And so that creates a vulnerability in each building to begin with. The fire station has, which the other buildings doesn't, at the fire truck bays, there's those concrete columns around there. The concrete columns are what we call non-ductile. And non-ductile just means that in an earthquake, when they move, they don't have the ability to move without fracturing. Something that's ductile can bend when it moves, and those columns don't have that feature. Now, coming back to your walls for a second, I'll talk briefly what seismically you do to retrofit these. When walls, typically there are several different things, but all include adding new concrete walls or new masonry walls, sometimes a steel braced frame to back up those existing walls. So the strength that's in those walls is no longer carrying those walls. It would then be carried by the backup system. And the advantage of doing that, and I don't worry about the non-ductile columns too much in a building like this, because what happens is when you do a retrofit, you make the wall so stiff that the non-ductile columns don't pose a problem. Now, we use the word diaphragm strength. Every building, you got a roof, you have, plywood on it or dingy deck or some sort of a material on the roof. Structurally, we call that a structural diaphragm. And that structural diaphragm, when the building moves, we want it all to move together. And so we don't want the walls going one way and the roof going the other way. And so a diaphragm ties the walls and the roof structure together in simplicity. Over the fire station where you have the truck bays, it has a T&G wood sheathing. Tongue and groove. I think it's tongue and groove. It might be just straight sheathing, but lots of times they're tongue and groove. And those make poor diaphragms. They don't have the adequate strength to resist earthquake forces. Now over this part, they have steel joist and what appears to be some sort of a concrete topping on it. A lot of it wasn't visual, so we couldn't look at it really close. And so if we ever got into it, we'd need to do a detailed investigation of it. Concrete can make a very strong diaphragm depending on how it's detailed. Being the age of the building, I doubt it would be detailed correctly to do that. Now, we talked about the importance of this diaphragm. It's got to transfer all the loads back and forth from the building and tie it all together. Well, the connection of that diaphragm to the walls gets to be very you can go back to up to 1973. They didn't have really good provisions for diaphragm connections. And they had, in the Sylmar earthquake, the 1971 Sylmar earthquake in California, they had a lot of buildings failures as a result of not having, even though they had strong diaphragms and had strong walls, they didn't have strong connections between them. Characteristic of all these buildings is they lack the necessary connections to make those strong enough. And that would be something that would need to be added. Now, for these T and G ones, it's a pretty simple thing normally to fix. Normally what we do is we just come in and put plywood sheathing over the top of it. The only challenge you have in this case is because of your, how long ago did they re-roof the fire station?
6 years.
6 years ago. They re-roofed it without putting the plywood on top of it, which means you either have to take that roof off that you just put on there and do it, or again, I have done in a couple of cases where that's been the case, where you come in and you put the plywood on the bottom side. A lot more labor intensive that way, but it's cheaper, way cheaper than tearing the existing roof off. The building has short parapets. Typically, short parapets aren't a major problem, but because of the location of the parapets, they're right over the fire truck bay doors. That becomes an issue. Normally, like I said, they're short enough that you wouldn't worry about them. But in this building, because of its essential character, they represent a problem. And then, well, I won't talk too much about it in general, but non-structural bracing. All the elements in the building, your ceilings that are here, for example, that's a non-structural element. They're not braced properly. In a major earthquake, those ceiling tiles will fall down. And they're why they might be considered like they're not at the hitching head. They don't feel lightweight.
And that concrete slab's gonna come down.
Yeah, if it's bad enough for that concrete slab to come down,
You won't have a
Sounds like
building
fire.
left.
yeah. Okay, so those are the basic structural elements that we found the deficiencies. Any questions on what we're covering there?
When Stephen's talking about these tying the walls together and diagrams and so forth, if you think of a house of cards, what the weaknesses are in a house of cards, it's the same principles that we're talking about here, is that if the walls aren't tied together and the roof isn't tied to the walls, you push on the roof and everything comes down. It's the same, essentially the same principles that we're talking about.
Okay, Dave.
Okay, I'm gonna stay sitting down. In terms of evaluating these buildings for building code, things we look at are basic life safety requirements. That includes having door exit requirements, having corridors that meet exit requirements, having construction type which matches the current code for that type of occupancy and use. We look at things like accessibility to meet current app requirements. We look at the requirements for or not for fire space. We look at how close buildings are to their property lines or to adjacent buildings and how they would be evaluated there. All of those things come into play. So for the fire station, a couple of things come up. First off, the building was originally constructed as a shop building for the high school, as you know. And a fire station is generally characterized, as Stephen said, as an essential facility, which requires it to meet a higher strength than other buildings, which is not made. It's also been retrofitted to fit fire department functions, and some of those fits aren't very good. For example, we have firemen who have sleeping quarters tucked in low ceiling heights up in their house. We don't have a emergency generator. We don't have fire sprinklers, which are a baseline requirement for building of this type. You have the public restroom facilities with the firefighters, shower facilities, and locker facilities, which is not a good plan. You meet most of the requirements for exits, but not all of the exits meet requirements for door widths and so forth. The existing restroom facilities do not meet stability codes for access. You have a ramp at your main entry to the new development area, but it does not meet current requirements. Somebody made a good faith effort, but if you evaluate it by code, it's not there. And then we have things like the storage in the basement, which is, well, without fire spring and so forth, is pretty far outside of code parameters the way it's set up. Steve, you want to talk about the electrical, or you want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay. The electrical service needs to be updated. The existing electrical transformer room, I was amazed to find that it was unlocked and that you could walk in there, and it's a very, very dangerous place because you have 12,000 plus volt exposed wiring in there. And anybody could walk in, and it's just an amazing hazard. And right outside of it, you have theatrical stuff piled ceiling high. So there are a number of challenges from a code standpoint. And as we did the evaluation, we made some recommendations as to what continued use as a fire station would entail. So for example, my recommendations are to fix all the things we talked about, but also to take this wing, which is community development, and repurpose it to house all of the fire station, the fire department, administrative offices, to get the public out of their bedroom and shower and office spaces, to provide a training room for them, probably a room like this, and to provide sleeping quarters that are safe, accessible, meet code requirements, and are not a danger to the users who are trying to get out a door that's only this tall. So baseline, that's where we come from, is we look at it from those standpoints. And while the building generally, it meets the code requirements that were in place at the time it was constructed, but for use as an essential facility, to be a fire facility, it's very far out of premise and requires a lot of work.
For each of the buildings, you now have a floor for each of the buildings that Dave's office put together for us. Want to talk about the roofing at all, Dave?
Sure. Over this portion of the building, your roofs are very from poor to very poor condition, and are in, let's just say that if we were to tear them off and go exploring to see what kind of water damage you had, I would not place any money on any bets on it. For any building, the single biggest enemy is.
Yeah, I hate to do this to you, but can you put that mic right in front of
Or the long neck ones be better?
possibly, but this one's
I'll just
proximity. It'll pick him up.
I'll just put it there. Okay. There is the greatest enemy to buildings, period. It's always been that way, and it continues to be that. And we have roofing failures, as we see here. That means that water is getting into the building. Now, while you may not see drips showing up on ceilings, if they're getting into that structure and they are eroding or corroding the structure, that can have a big impact on viability of the building. When we go at the rec center, we'll see some exterior damage to the masonry due to water on the building too, and so forth.
This is that transformer room that Dave was talking about, and me and Dave talked briefly about it. You had someone say they wouldn't even walk in there.
Yeah, an electrician.
Yeah,
I wouldn't walk in there.
I did have our electrician. He said he wasn't afraid to walk in there, but he's around it all the time. But he was surprised that it was locked. There wasn't a sign on the outside that said your high voltage area, and the system, and it is old. And you would upgrade that with when you come in and put an emergency generator, which you'd have to have. That's a system that would be totally replaced.
Now, I think that the door to this, the transformer isn't named up, but the door to the actual building below.
Okay. But if you had someone down in the storage area doing stuff,
Right.
so you probably want to secure it, and it should have at least have as a minimum a sign on it that says high danger, high voltage. So, okay. Any other questions before we leave the fire station? Old recreation center. Again, when you look at my list, like we talked about earlier, it's gonna be very similar. You have the URM walls that don't have the strength. The roof has space sheathing on it. That's the main roof. There's the sheathing over the addition is not spaced. And they have added plywood at some time in the past to over the main roof, but wouldn't be code compliant plywood, but out of plane because of the shape of the building, this is kind of a major issue. As we talked about them, it does have some short parapets on it. Commercial seismic bracing, again, is always a particular concern because there's that heavy plaster ceiling that's on there. I'll show a picture of that briefly.
Stephen, explain the short parapets.
Well, you have over the addition, it's got a flat roof and there's some short parapets. I don't know how tall they are actually because access to get up on that roof was, I don't know if you've ever tried to get up, it's precarious and I didn't try to do that. And then you also have short parapets on that front end.
On the south end.
Yes, on the south end.
Basically, what you're saying is the walls extend past the roof,
Yes,
whereas normally a wall will stop at the roof.
correct.
So that section that passes the roof is called the parapet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's,
So I think we know what that is, but is that a problem?
From a seismic standpoint, parapets in unreinforced masonry. If you look at the photos from the Olympia, Washington earthquake, and from earthquakes in San Francisco and other areas, what you'll see is a lot of parapets break off right at the roof and fall onto the sidewalks below. So they form, they're not structural, but their failure in an earthquake poses a direct safety hazard to persons outside the building. And so that's why they become an issue. Same thing comes up with unreinforced masonry, chimneys and similar structures that they're not part of the building structure proper, but if they fail in an earthquake, they do pose a life safety hazard.
So a short one is.
Is bad.
yeah, it's just, yeah, what happens
This
is,
has a short one.
I'm assuming that, but I haven't actually been up the roof to see it because like I said, the access to it was precarious and I
We
was.
have a ladder truck, we can.
Yeah, then that would have been okay.
They're 2 feet.
So you've been out there the 2 feet?
They're 2 feet.
Okay, so that would be probably moderately high then. So, now for the old rec and the other buildings, the roof structure, part of our job wasn't to do a vertical study of the buildings. We were doing it seismic. But there are some things that when you look at them, they jump out at you as being, oh, that's bad for carrying snow loads on the roof. Okay. Both the main building and the one over the addition would be non-compliant with current standards. This is a picture where you have they have these laminated arch beams, which first time I've ever seen one of those in my life. They were bolt laminated, the way they're constructed. And then the roof structure, that's the upper roof structure, and then this is that plaster ceiling that I was talking about. In a major earthquake, this plaster ceiling would be down on the ground.
So are those like boards, the narrow boards with the plaster stuck to the bottom?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, you can see they have this little lath. They put some little, like, one buys in there, and then they put plaster underneath it. So, I've got pictures from other earthquakes on those types of ceilings that have fallen, and you wouldn't want to be in there.
They're heavy.
Yes. Now, I bring this up though, because if you're gonna spend the money on these buildings to bring them up to current code, mandated by code to do the roof structure. It's been there for 100 years. It's got a steep pitched roof, and that steep pitched roof sheds most of the snow that gets up there. But from a pure code analysis viewpoint, it would not comply with current code. Now, I don't know how far it's off. I don't know if it's a little off or a lot off. That'll take actual structural analysis to determine how much that is. And I've thrown a number at it in the cost estimate based on experience working with other buildings, but that's, and we'll talk about that more to get into the ours.
What does it say?
It's for 100 years. Okay, that's my, it would not meet code provisions, but just because it doesn't meet code, the code have safety factors in it. And for wood structural, safety factors tend to be higher than they are for steel or concrete. For example, we did a seismic, we upgraded Old Main up at Utah State University years ago. We found that the framing in that roof was 2 to 3 times over what code allowables would be, and then the connections were 7 to 8 times over what code allowables would be. And yet there had been there for 120 years at the time we did the analysis. And so there's things that there's some conservatism in the code, but from a pure code analysis viewpoint, it would not be code. Or it would likely, I should say it's likely not, because you do have the advantage, it's got a very steep pitched roof. That's the roof over there. The roof that you have over the addition is these are what we call builder trusses. They would lumber together, and they'd have a couple bolts. And this is one of those connections where if you actually calculate the loads in those things compared to code, they would probably be 4, 5, 6 times over code allowable value.
So you actually mean that they just cobbled together wood to put this?
Well, by our modern standards, I would call it cobbled together, yes.
It was standard practice at the time.
Yes, it was standard practice. There's no one that you would find in the US that would build something like that anymore. But it was common practice at the time.
Do we have a year that was on?
I think 29 is what I want to say.
Addition circa 1920 is what I have.
I think there was actually, yeah, you got 19%. I might be right. But it's in that era.
Okay.
Okay. And so it is, and like I said, by code, we would not be mandated to existing non-conforming condition, but as long as it was legal at the time it's built, you're not mandated to change it.
But also because it's remaining, its current use is the original use. Its use and occupancy has not changed century. It's an assembly building. And so
When you change the use, would we have to?
if you change it to a more intensive use, that would cause for example, the fire station is a change in use. It was constructed as a shop building and now it's a fire station. And that should have triggered an upgrade to the building at the time it was converted.
And so, but our normal recommendation is you're spending money, if you're gonna spend the money it takes to retrofit these, we normally most owners that we work with, because we leave it up to owners' decisions. And most owners we've dealt with, whether it's been school districts, well, and I'll take it back, it depends on which school district. I won't give names. There's one school district that we touch them and we find a problem, even though I don't think it's a problem. They want it to meet code, and so we upgraded. Another school district was willing to, they were planning on replacing the building anyway for the one I was leaving it that. So there's work I've done when I've gone in and done retrofit work for LDS Church. They've always had us do the retrofits on them and bring up the code. And they're really not too bad to do, because what you end up doing, well, assuming you have access, the hard part is not having access. And what you normally do is you pull the ceiling out so you have good access from below. And then you come in and you put great big giant plywood gusset plates on them, and with lots of nails. So it's, once you get the access, it's pretty easy to do, but you do have to tear the ceiling out and get access to it. Okay, Dave?
Okay. Interesting thing about this building is, again, it's stayed in purpose and use for over 100 years, which makes it a very significant cultural resource in the community. I want to recognize that. Also, because of that continued use, the code does not mandate that it be upgraded. However, there are a number of things that our report is intending to do is to demonstrate where it deviates from current code requirements, and you can make decisions as to where and how you want to make improvements and investments in the facility. So, for example, it is over area. No, it's not over area, excuse me. If you look at the
Somebody come back. I didn't put your area.
we have, no, this doesn't show all the data. In the report, it explains that you have an allowable basic area of 9,000 square feet. Because you have a lot of space around the building, you can increase that allowable area to 13,500. And your main floor is a little over 10,000 square feet. So, for example, that doesn't meet current requirements. But there are some other issues that come into play. For example, accessibility. It does not, none of the restrooms, none of the spaces, even the entries in the building, none of them meets the current access requirements for ADA. You don't, from a life safety standpoint, none of the exits meets the door width or other life safety exit requirements in the code. There's no access to the, there's no ADA access to the second floor areas of the building. You have the weight training area, strength training area for the public safety folks. But if you were to have someone who was wanted to or was appropriate for them to use it, they wanted to get there to use it. And that's contrary to the intent of the ADA. All of the stairs and doors accessing the second floor areas are, how to say this nicely, grossly deficient in terms of stair width, handrails, landings, and so forth. Now, they were built that way, and you can make a decision as to how much investment you want to make to bring the building into conformity with the codes. The city is only really in trouble if something happens to somebody trying to get out of there in an emergency. Or if someone sues you saying they have a right to access a certain area that other people have access to and they can't get there because it's not accessible to them. But again, this is an historic building. A lot of whack in what you're absolutely required to do. And in fact, you're not absolutely required to do anything as long as it remains in existing use, the way you choose to do so. The building is deficient in restroom facilities. Not only are they not accessible, but it's insufficient for the calculated load, the occupant load of the building. It has separate facilities, but those facilities are not, they just don't meet current plumbing or other code requirements. Looking at the electrical and mechanical and plumbing systems, our expectations would have to be replaced entirely. And in fact, that's something that if the building is to remain in use, you're going to want to look at very closely because the equipment in the building is has life expectancy at this point.
You're talking about HVAC?
HVAC, electrical, and plumbing, all of them, yes.
Okay.
At some point, some of the mechanical systems have been upgraded, but even that was done long enough ago that those systems have exceeded their life expectancy. Other things to take into account, it is an historic resource. And so I would hope and recommend that the city keep it in use, find a way to make it useful and keep it in use. It does have challenges, and they are all addressable. And you can do them over time. You don't have to do everything at once. You can do it over time as you choose. The biggest concerns are the large discrepancy regarding emergency use areas, door widths, halfway widths, stair widths, and so forth. So that's just something to take into consideration.
Did you cover in the unreinforced masonry? Did you cover the cracks that are starting to appear in the base of the building?
I need to go back and look at that. I believe we have a dollar value for Those cracks they're old buildings, they settle a little bit and they move. Structurally, they're not a sign that the building's getting ready to collapse. But generally, the masonry around the building, and Dave can tell you about that, but you have a lot of water damage. A lot of that brick would just really, you'd want to repoint the building. What they do is they take out the mortar that's in there, about an inch or 2 inches deep, and then you replace that mortar. And that would for the look to
Well, I'm wondering, is this a brick building that's it, it's made out of brick?
yes,
Yes,
you are in
it
it.
is.
Yes, it's
And
on
so that is a
Seismically.
structural,
yes,
it's a structural wall.
It's a
There's nothing on the
structural-
other side of that wall, it's the brick.
No, well, it has, the building is settled differentially. I don't want to say that it's splitting because truly that is a misnomer. The building has flexed relative to its foundation. And found that different parts are settled at different rates than other parts. And when that happens, the stresses that are induced in the wall travel up and follow the joints brick. And that's what you're seeing. These buildings have a certain amount of slow flexibility as those things happen. I don't see you can correct me. It's, but these old buildings, they settle and they get comfortable and then a lot of times they stop. And I don't think there's any indication that settling is continuing. I think it's.
So
Pretty
the
well fit.
process you described of cleaning out the grout that's there and then putting it back in,
Yes.
is that going to
No,
change it?
No,
You leave it,
It's
you
gonna
leave
stay
it the
where
way
it's
it
at.
is?
Yeah.
And then you just regrout it, but it'll be
Yeah.
thicker in some
it's
places.
called repointing. And basically
Repointing.
repointing. And so you come in, dialing saws, and you cut out the mortar joints to a certain depth, and then you come back and you repoint. Critical things there is you have to use a mortar that is not stronger than the brick. If you use a mortar that is harder or stronger than the brick, as any stresses, and there are always stresses in this building, but any stresses happen, the brick will fail rather than the mortar. Okay? And that's bad. So the goal would be to have someone who is knowledgeable and has expertise in developing the right mortar and applying it would do this work rather than somebody who knows how to lay brick and says, hey, I'll do the work. It's critical.
in these brick walls, what you'll have is there'll be typically these will be three. I didn't the thickness of the wall. Sometimes they're 4 wide thick, depending on the size of the wall. And when you look at these buildings, what you'll see is that, you have your bricks laid, but every now and then they'll have one turn 90 degrees. And that creates and so there's a lot of these walls depend on gravity to hold them together. And so the little cracks don't necessarily, they don't look good. They make you feel uncomfortable, but they don't necessarily make the building weaker than it already is.
Okay.
Now,
What we've heard from our public, and they're just like the ones that are saying it, we're not experienced in these things, right? So when you see a building where the cracks kind of goes, you get a little nervous. You
Yeah.
just want to know what the status of that is.
Yeah. It doesn't make it more or less subject to damage in an earthquake. As long as those cracks are open though, it does make it more subject to damage from weather and water. And as you look at the building and the photos in the report, you'll notice that there's a lot of surface damage in the lower 4 feet of the exterior brick due to computer sprinklers spraying on the building. And that's something that the city can fix right now. There should be no direct impact of water on that building from the irrigation system because, again, that just destroys the building very quickly. So when they do the repointing, where you have bricks that are so substantially damaged, move those and replace them with new bricks. The hope is to find close enough match that it look right and not be a problem. One thing to warn you against is when we talk about water, there's always a temptation to come in and have somebody apply a sealant, a non-breathable sealant to the mortar joints. And that's a really bad thing to do because what it actually does is trap moisture inside the wall. And you don't want that to happen. And that goes for all the buildings, all the brick buildings. Is that if you trap in the walls, that moisture then continues to degrade, especially when you have freeze-thaw cycles, then the damage is accelerated. So again, Renovation and restoration, antique masonry is a very special skill set. And we strongly recommend that as you choose to do things in that regard on any of these buildings, that you solicit the talents of very expert masons that know that work. The roof is in fairly, the slope roof is in fairly decent shape. There's no signs of obvious failure. It would have to be replaced if we were to do a diaphragm on the roof. Obviously, that makes it. Again, it's a wonderful antique building, and you have flexibility of choosing what to change and what to leave. But certainly, your highest priority that I would recommend is at least taking steps to preserve it to prevent further deterioration.
Okay, would you recommend what that is?
The first thing is, and pardon me, I'm going to talk to the mic. The first thing is basically to get water, to not put more water on the building. The second thing is to repoint and repair the exterior masonry. To go back and make sure that the roof is examined and make sure that there is no water entering the building through any deficiencies in the roof system. Either the slope roof or above condition. Those are the three priorities to preserving the building and preventing further damage.
What about the plaster inside?
The lath and plaster is a life safety item. Seismic event. It doesn't take much to break that up and have it fall. And due to the height of the space, let's say you're having a dance in there. Due to the height of the space, it can fall a long ways, it develops a lot of energy, and when it hits somebody, it can cause severe injury.
So there's a recommendation there on replacing that with something else?
Yes, that plaster should be, you'd probably remove the plaster and then come back with a new drywall, right? That's all you need to do. But there's a lot of demolition involved in that.
What about just covering it? I mean, I've ripped out old houses and gotten into ceilings, and there's, to me, even earthquake, that wood, every bit of that is nailed on those trusses. And so most likely the plaster is going to crack and fall before the wood is going to crack and fall. And so you keep talking about the ceiling falling down. Really, you might have 22 tons of plaster hit the floor, or a piece of wood becomes disconnected from the truss. So I just wanted to clear that. I've ripped these buildings apart before, not that big, but I've been up there. Could you just cover it?
You could, but one of the things that we try to do when we do seismic is weight. You're doing seismic. Because the earthquake forces are directly proportional. And so you got that heavy plaster, and then you come in and put a heavy, you can put the sheet board right over the top of it and screw through it, right?
With thicker screws.
Yeah.
Or deeper
and
screws.
that would confine the plaster in place, but but now you've got a lot more weight on that roof. Remember, we were talking about the fact that the roof might not meet code provisions for current weights. Well, now we're adding more weight to the situation where we don't know that we have enough capacity to begin with. So
where we add weight, there is actually a code stipulation that we would have to evaluate it against current code, whether or not it can carry that weight. So just saying we encapsulate the plaster with drywall or another system, by adding weight to that roof system, we would have to evaluate that roof system.
Several old plaster buildings have been retrofit with what's essentially chicken wire over the top of the plaster. If it's secured back into the main structure, will hold that plaster from falling down. Very little weight, which doesn't add anything to it, and can prevent a life safety issue.
Yes, but is that what you want your roof to look like? That's a trade-off.
That's an aesthetic. I agree. So from a structural standpoint, it can be dealt with. From the aesthetics reason, there's other things to be considered.
Yeah. I mean, you can put on there, they have, there's a high-tech wallpaper. They have the fiberglass wallpaper, and you could put that over and anchor it probably. That doesn't add any weight, but that stuff costs $10 a square foot. So it'd be cheaper to pull it off and re-put a new chipboard on there before you went that route.
Or chicken wire.
Yeah, or chipboard, because you can live with it, yes. Yeah, there are lots of options. If you're preserving the building.
No, I think that when we talk about that, we need to look at, we're trying to keep more of a historical building, not just cobble it together. So it would need to be restored somewhat to its beauty and preserved in the way that it was originally designed.
Yeah, I can't remember if you mentioned it, but I know we've talked, if you look at a couple of the buildings, the main, so no offense, man, but they haven't been maintained very well. And so they have deteriorated somewhat as far as their appearance on the inside.
So some of the things that you've recommended that needed to be done, good ideas, some of that is having to do with the decision to rebuild or remodel. But there are some things that probably could be done today or in the next month. One is suggestion on the proper mortar, fill in some of those cracks a little bit, maybe stop some of the water from going. The Parks Department can work on their systems to maybe get that sprinkler water not to hit the building anymore.
Hey, Mark,
And just a thought.
thank you.
Mhm.
We're going to cover the.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, just an interior shot. For whatever it's worth, you see these rods going across, those are tension ties for those arch trusses they have on the roof. And
Was that original or was that?
I think it was original.
They appear to be original, but it's hard to tell.
Yeah. I mean, when you come back here, in this picture right here, you'll see this block and that bolt right there. That's where those are coming through. Those are where those tension ties are.
So it's going through that,
Yes,
laminated.
through there and it comes through. They've got that block there to hold it in place. There's nothing, as I looked at that, because that was one of the questions, that are they original? That's a great question. And looking at that, it looks.
The dust all looks.
Yes, it all looks the same. So, and you think about the difficulty. So.
Wait, so are they?
No, those are rods. They've got old rods and they're old. You've got, turnbuckles on them.
Okay.
And they're threaded ends. So, yeah. And they've got enough tension at eye
I
level.
remember seeing it look like that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a beautiful picture.
How did you do that?
Were you standing on a basketball hoop?
That one, no. I might even hold the camera up like that. Who knows? Yeah.
You get actually some of the problems. For example, you see the stairway on the left side of the picture. You can see that it doesn't actually have a handrail. It has a low wall, and it's very narrow. And that's the circulation from this area up to the small gym up there above.
Well, isn't there another one on
And
the
and
right
there
hand
is
side?
on the
a
right
much
hand side.
wider one?
Yes, but it has doors without landings, which again is a problem from a life safety
Oh,
code
okay.
standpoint. Yeah,
You step out
get
and
all
it's
of-
down.
Well, you get down and when you get to the door, you're actually standing 6 to 8 inches above, higher than the door level because there's no landing.
Right.
Things like that. That's on the other side of it.
So, okay. Old LDS seminary building. Okay, you look at my list, you're gonna see I cut and pasted the list and, basically the same types of comments, spaced wood sheathing. Now, one of this interest, now let me come back. One of the things we didn't notice, and you might not notice, but you'll see that this is a little bit different color than this is over here. Because right here, this was an addition later. And I didn't notice that until I got up in the roof. And when you get up, and we talked about, again, the seismic issues basically are the same. Now, the retrofit for this building is a little simpler because of it's a smaller size building. There's been lots of times with buildings like this where the seismic retrofit for the walls is just going in there, adding 2x4 furring around the inside, putting plywood on the inside, and then anchoring it well to the exterior walls. So the retrofit for the walls are fairly, you don't have to come back and add heavy concrete or heavy reinforced walls like you would for the rec building and fire station.
Do you have a square footage on that one?
Yes, it is 2,555 square feet. As close as we can tell. And that grows out the out area.
Now, the roof is, well, it's an old conventional stick framing. You can see how it is. This is again one of those that drives actually structural engineers nuts, because when you go through and do calculations on roofs like this, there's no way it should be standing, and yet there it is. It's been there since 1920.
1929, and then added about to 1930.
So, you know, it's been there and it still stands.
Is that the old roof on the right?
Yes,
there?
you can see that. So I didn't know there the addition until I got up here. When I crawled up in the attic, you can see that's where the old roof is. That's the old original shingles and everything up there. So structurally, pretty simple again, like we emphasized before, it's lasted that long. There's nothing in the code that would mandate that you upgrade that roof structure. However, our recommendation would be, because when we look at this, we look at retrofitting these buildings, we're saying that we're going to add 50 years to the life of these buildings. And when you're adding that life and useful life to the building, it just makes sense to go up there and strengthen the elements while you're doing it.
And the cost to do so as part of a large, obviously, is lower than if you were to come back and just pick up problems as they occur piecemeal.
Okay, Dave?
As long as this one actually is the most viable from a modern usage standpoint. The existing building could easily readily be used for city offices, gathering space, and so forth. To meet functional requirements as well as code requirements, we recommend upgrading the restrooms. Right now, there's one single occupant restroom that is very distaste friendly, small. This building should have male and female restrooms, and it should have restrooms that meet code. Again, the ramp that was installed in the back of the building does certain code requirements. It was a good faith effort at the time that we went in. There are, most of the interiors that would provide public circulation are wide enough to accommodate accessibility. One issue would be the single glazed windows. Again, we've got mechanical, electrical, plumbing that essentially it must be, needs to be replaced completely. What's there has reached or exceeded its life. And so as you do new mechanical equipment, you're going to look at your windows and say, what would the benefit be of adding either storm windows or having the windows upgraded to double pane, or replacing the windows with a higher energy performing windows? Because right now, they're a giant heat sink for the building as far as the heating in the winter is concerned. But this building is very viable from a use standpoint by the city, either as a gathering space for meetings. You've got the 2 large classrooms, or you could convert it to offices or a city department or something like that quite readily.
The 4, you're saying this is the least poor?
This one that's most viable from an immediate use standpoint. And I think the costs reflect that. The cost estimates reflect that substantially.
Is the porch attached to the building? Is the porch actually attached to the building?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's too thin.
Yeah, if you look at this, the original thing was this square here. And this wall probably should be shown thicker because it would be like a, it's a brick wall that comes around. And this appear to have been built at the same time as the addition on it.
Is there an upstairs on this one?
No, just a basement, but it's not.
Oh, there's a
very
basement.
deep.
Partially, you come down here, and the basement basically is underneath this part. It's basically mechanical and they got the
I think I
janitor.
have some more props or something down there too, don't I?
Some what now?
Some more props.
I can't remember prompts down in there.
No,
it's pretty cleaned out.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems to be.
It's mostly
You got a-
mechanical.
Yeah, you got crawl spaces underneath all of this space, and then the basement, like I said, it's about probably that area right there. In fact, this stairway here was probably originally exterior to the building. Okay, so any questions on the full seminary one? Okay, Beck home. Okay, again, structurally, you're gonna see the same list again. Nothing, and again, the same retrofit scheme that I mentioned that worked for the seminary building because of the size of the building. Walls, now, and I didn't mention this earlier, the furring the walls works really good because the electrical gives you a new place to run electrical. It gives you a place, because these buildings, I should say, non-insulated. They're not insulated, so it gives you, you can add insulation. The only negative in doing it to this building is if there's any of the finishes on the inside that are considered historical to the building, you lose those when you recover it. But I imagine you could match the style. But again, the same thing would apply there. Again, the roof, old stick frame. Yeah, you can, now, the electricians think those have actually been abandoned, but you can see how they did the old electrical up there. But they do have, you see the new, so I don't know if all those are abandoned and all.
What kind of insulation is that? Is that just sand?
Yeah, not very much. Now, from a structural point, when I see an old like this and I see no insulation in there, I feel really good because one of the things that we depend on is the heat escaping the building and melting snow off the roof. That's one of the reasons that many times these buildings don't fail. I can actually, there's documented cases where people have gone in, added extra insulation, allowed snow to accumulate and actually cause structural damage. And that has happened.
So freezing to death is okay because the heat goes up and melts the snow.
Yes, or you're just spending a lot of money to heat it, to keep from freezing. So,
Old wiring I see in
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
That's not hooked up to anything, though, is it?
I don't think so. I didn't test it.
We believe that this has been abandoned.
You can see there around. So we're assuming.
It looks like the wiring goes up and over the electric.
So, again, but this is one of the reasons why you'll notice that when we've given you a cost for these buildings, we've put in a new electrical system in all the buildings. Because we're assuming that it's old enough and outdated that.
What's the age on this building?
It was built in 26.
Okay, Dave?
Yeah, I have to say that what you have here, in and of itself, is an architectural gem. Getting into it and walking through the building, I was amazed at how much of the historic fabric, interior and exterior, remained intact. And that's true for the main floor and for the one bedroom that's above the living room. The basement has been gutted and repartitioned into multiple apartments and so forth. But the main floor where you have the living room and so forth, the living room, dining room, an eagle nook area, and then the bedrooms is essentially original, which is very unusual for a building of this age. And it's a beautiful example of craftsman style building. It truly is. And in fact, you have on the exterior of the building, you have the brickwork with the clinker bricks. You have the shingles that's still intact. the beadboard soffits under the roof overhangs, which in places are deteriorating rapidly. And you have the original windows as well, with all of their divided lights. So these are all original windows with their architectural features. You have all of the brackets that are original. You have all of the shingle work that's original. It is truly a gem. However, if the city is intending to do for a city use other than storage, and storage is a problem too, then you get some problems because it's completely inaccessible for the handicapped. And that's only from the area to get into the building, but to circulate within the building at all. All of the systems need to be refurbished, the mechanical plumbing. The spaces inside could be partitioned, but not all of them are on the same level, and so you have the issues of how do you deal with workspaces that are not on the level that's accessible? You don't have space inside the building to put ramps and so forth. It's a 1926 home, and so the hallways are narrow and short. The doors are narrow, and what happens then is you have this trade-off where you have an architectural gem, but to make it usable by the city, you would have to destroy most of that architectural value, the stuff that's valuable in it, from an architectural historical standpoint.
Could the home be moved?
Yes, it can be moved. In fact, our firm has moved one of the largest unreinforced masonry buildings ever done in Salt Lake, the Alcoa Salt, that was moved. It was moved across the street and turned 180 degrees. So we build the new courthouse.
Do you have just an estimate for something like that? So we're talking hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands?
I don't. I mean, I can get that, but that was not part of my evaluation. It is not inexpensive. And typically what happens is if you have a fairly lightweight, simple structure, for example, you may even see on the television about moving clapboard houses or clapboard churches, down the roadways and so forth. Those things are pretty straightforward to do. For masonry building, it's a more complicated issue, and complication equals cost. And so what happens generally is you have to have someone who either has a historical artifact, which often is an individual who's related to that, or a government agency which is mandated to preserve historical artifacts as part of its purview in developing facilities. In this case, as far as we're aware, there isn't anybody that fits either of those categories. If
Flippin' Pleasant Grove,
no,
a new series.
We've had people inquire, once they look at the cost of moving it, it's usually been the thing that's slowing down.
Again, it's could it be used? The answer is yes. And the question is at what cost? And not only cost in dollars, but also cost and impact on the historic fabric of the building.
I'm just curious if there's a particular kind of use. I think of like sorry, Mayor, but maybe this economic development that the only public entry was on the main level. Could it do something like that still as a public building, but not,
As soon as it's a public building, you have the issue of public access. And the domino effect that occurs when you have to provide access to the public, again, it pushes those dominoes down against all of those historic finishes and materials.
So, summary on this building, you're saying, yes, we could use it. It's architecturally of value.
Absolutely.
The cost of using it for public facilities, one of the costs is we would lose a substantial amount of the architectural charm.
Yeah,
That's part of
what
it.
we call the historic fabric.
Okay. So the exterior might look the same, but
We
Other
would
than
need to
that-
we need to get a ramp in. But for example, even the front door is new than a wheelchair can fit through. And it's 4 inches above the surface of the front porch, which means then that you have to, as soon as you raise the porch up to make it flush, then that impacts the front stairs. And to meet code, those stairs all have to have the same riser height. And you see what I'm saying, you start following these strings through and the impact becomes extraordinary compared to the little change that you're trying to make.
Like you included a cost estimate.
Yes.
Okay.
We included a cost estimate
To make it public.
to make it public so you could use it. But right now, it's being used for storage, and I would offer that is even a less appropriate use than a public use. And the reason I say that is structural rather than functional. A storage use can easily exceed 125 pounds per square foot load on the floor. And I doubt that floor is rated for 50 pounds per square foot. It might be. Again, right now, the use that's in there is questionable from a structural standpoint. And the best of all, if I could paint a picture of the best of all worlds, it would be to find somebody who wants to buy that house and trade a prime piece of property desirable to the city in return for it. That would be the best of all worlds, but the likelihood of that is for you folks to determine.
If the city got up to code to rent out for income each month just to, as a house, would we have to bring it up to accessibility code for that purpose? No?
No. You could actually leave it essentially as is. You would need to, there are maintenance issues that need to be addressed in order to preserve the building. Again, most of the masonry exterior is intact. There is some that's been damaged. You want to examine it and again, repair it where appropriate. There are some areas where roof drainage has been compromised, and that's causing water damage, and you need to fix those things. All of these are relatively minor. So for a person to move into the home, as a home, the dollars spent would be relatively minor as opposed to.
And we're talking 1,400 square.
It's not big, but it has some amazing features. For example, in the upstairs bedroom, the bed, a trundle bed that's embedded in the wall. A piece of cabinetry that's built into the wall, and you pull it right out from the wall and it hides back in the attic behind the wall. And that was original to the house. You have other pieces of similar kind of cabinetry that are original on the bedroom, other bedrooms and so forth. And then you have even original lighting fixtures, it appears, and all of the paneling and detail woodwork and cabinetry in the original dining room. So,
Are old rec center and back home, are pieces from there salvageable to use in other areas of the city, or like for just repurposing or museum type thing? Or,
I was thinking selling and show.
Yeah.
well, there are companies, if the determination was to tear down the back home, there are companies that would salvage all of the valuable architectural components, right down to the old straight grained clear Douglas for paneling and so forth.
Do you see cities repurposing though the building if it needs to be torn down, that they're a lot of material?
No. Mostly because the new building would have to meet code criteria in every case.
Mhm.
And so we could, if we certainly want to reuse some of this, we could incorporate it, but it would be more as decoration than as functional components. For example, the windows are beautiful. And you could bring and put them in, but they would have to be or otherwise placed behind a window that meets current energy standards and so forth.
Okay, now for the fun part, the dollars. So the information that's on that table one was transferred from a couple of different other sheets that are buried in the document. So I thought I'd spend a few minutes talking about these documents here, and then you can see where the numbers that come from that are in table one. Now, first, for the seismic cost
Is that
estimate,
on our-
Hmm?
Do we have this page?
you do have, it in-
Okay.
this is underneath the, these are both pages out of the fire station. I'd have to look to see what page number it is.
I'll, check it.
Okay. The cost estimate for the seismic, we used FEMA, it's 156 as a cost estimating guide for creating, and we use the term ballpark estimates. What it does is they've, throughout the western states, they went through and did seismic retrofits on a bunch of these. They gathered the construction cost for those seismic retrofits, and they put that into a table. And then what happens is that this methodology pulls that data out of statistical data to create the cost estimate for the seismic upgrade. It looks at things like, again, this is where the URM is. It looks at the size of the building. It looks at what seismicity we're in the buildings. We can pick a performance level for the building. Collapse prevention, for example, that's if you're only doing enough earthquake retrofit to keep people alive, the building's gonna be a total economic loss when you're done with the building. Upgraded to the standards of a new office building, where some damage, but there's no life safety hazards. And then there's immediate occupancy, and you'll see that we did both. We did both for all of the buildings. We did a life safety and immediate occupancy cost breakout for each one of these buildings. This is an older publication when they created all this statistical data, and so we've got an area adjustment factor for being here in Utah. We have I projected these costs to the year 2018 because we figured you weren't going to be doing this today. So this is to take in using an inflation rate of 4%, which is typical historical for building costs over time. We look at a confidence range. Those of you who are statistics guys know that there's a range that it could be in. And you end up with a lower bound, mean, and an upper bound cost range. Now, for the purposes of this report, in the table 1, I translated the mean cost is the value I translated to table 1. You can see here that there's a 4% up or down from that lower bound and the upper bound cost based on the criteria that I selected for this building. So we have, for the fire station, for immediate occupancy, see that came to $1,079,000. And you'll see when you come over to table 1, there's where I transferred that number over to that table.
Question.
Okay.
On the that upper value, does that include potential water damage that you mentioned, or is that a whole new ballpark?
That's well, when you get to water, we've done some. So here's where some of this gets put into. Now, water damage. Are you thinking of the rec center?
And this building.
Oh, for the new roof. Now we've put a cost in there to put a new roof on.
But if you
But if there's damage beyond that, we have not done that. If you got up here and pulled this roof off and found a bunch of damage, that's not in our cost estimate.
That's my question.
Okay.
Does your cost estimate include, making like the bathrooms right and the sleeping quarters right?
Yes.
And the separate rooms for the separate laundries and stuff that
Yes.
we need?
Yes, we have that in there. And I'll show you where we've got those numbers.
And this is pages 11 and 12 of the report,
We don't have that report.
and page 24.
We'll provide it to you,
Okay, thank
so every member of the PSB will have it.
So, okay. So there's that number. Now, the next number you see, this is an architectural putback cost. Okay, now architectural putback, what we mean is when you do a seismic retrofit, I've told you about, we're adding shear walls to the building. We're tearing out ceilings to add in new diaphragm to make new connections. Well, we're having to tear out architectural elements and finishes. We're having to sometimes move a duct is in the wrong spot or electrical is in the way of doing the seismic retrofit. And so that number is a number that goes in and says, okay, we've disturbed the building to make the seismic retrofit. What's it cost to do to put the building back into the condition it was before you did the seismic retrofit? So it doesn't include upgrading the building. It's just putting the building back to its current condition. Okay. Now, for these buildings, what we've done based on experience, and this number varies a little bit from building. For the fire station, we put that number in at 40% of the structural cost. So this number comes across there at that $431,000. You'll see that's where that's carried forward into table 1. We have the structural other. Fire station, I said the roof structure we didn't have to upgrade. For the other 3 buildings, that structural other is based on experience that we've had, because we didn't do any kind of a detailed analysis, but based on experience with other similar types of buildings, we've guessed a cost per square foot to upgrade those roofs. And that number shows in there. Like I said, the other ones you'll see that number come across in there. In fact, you'll see that's this structural other, and we say that's the roof upgrades. Okay, and that's where that number comes in. Now we get down to the architectural extra. Dave, and that comes over here. You want to go through that, Dave?
Sure. For the fire station, for the example here, what we did is we took each of our recommendations and we assigned a dollar value to it. In many cases, that dollar value is based on the expectation of removing existing systems or components, putting back new that meet current requirements. For the fire station, there was the expectation that this wing would be essentially gutted and would be reconfigured to serve the needs of the firemen exclusively. That was and that assumption is explained in the narrative.
Assumption.
So what you do is as you go through my list here, you can see that each recommendation has a value to the degree that we can determine the value, and tied back to what the expectations and assumptions are that dollar value is based on. Again, in most cases, this is based on the means construction cost estimating data, which is nationwide, and involves both takeout and put back of certain portions. What I've tried to do is avoid as much overlap as possible between the architectural put back that goes with the structural versus the work that comes relative to life safety, ADA, and other systems. So what you'll see here then is a number that, Steve, you corrected that.
Yeah, let me explain. And I think today, what happened is that Dave and me put together our independent of each other, and then we merged them together. We found that we were covering the same data twice. Okay, and so these items I happen to cover separately, and I'll explain those in a minute how I covered those. But so what I did is I took those numbers out of Dave's, which gives that an adjusted cost, and then those numbers are reflected otherwise, and I'll explain that in a minute.
And in some cases, for example, when we get to the rec center or to the seminary building, you could actually treat this to a certain degree as a menu. Yes, we want to do this. No, we don't want to spend money on that. For the fire station, I would offer that you do this as holistically as an overall approach.
And that has to do with the higher standard of life safety and use.
The higher standards, but also the time, given the number of conflicts and problems inherent in the use of the facility currently, that if we're going to spend this money, that the city will want to get best value on that.
So that's this line, that's this 851 that comes over after I took out those two items. Then when you come over here into our table 1, that's those values that 851 comes in. Okay, now
Can you go back to your summary for a sec?
okay,
No, just the other page. Yeah, you've got 2 columns under each one.
Yes.
What is the LS and the IO?
Okay, so the LS is life safety
Okay,
and the IO is immediate occupancy.
and are they separate or are they, you have to combine them?
No, these are separate. So this would be that we're retrofitting the building to the standards for a new building to meet current requirements. The immediate occupancy is for the essential facility for the fire station. Okay, and because you need that, it has to be functional. This building just has to survive the earthquake. This building has to be functional after the earthquake. And so that's the difference between the two is that functional part of the building. This building might be safe to go into, but it's not going to be functional after an earthquake.
Have to spend both amounts of money.
No, you don't.
One-
You do one or the
You
other.
do one or the other.
Yes, so you do this if you're gonna make it life safety. So, and that's the provision, if you're to go design a new office building or a new house, you're to meet the provisions of the building code for those occupancies, because a business, it's allowed to be non-occupiable after an earthquake, so there's a lower standard acceptable for those buildings. Police station, fire station, hospital.
So the fire
Oh.
station should be that second column.
Yes. And so while we're on the subject, we would recommend that you always pick, right, that you pick the immediate occupancy for the fire station. For all the other buildings, it would be just life safety. Now, you had in our one presentation, our preliminary one, when we were putting together the report, one of the board members, I don't remember which one it was, they asked us if, wow, give us what both values is for all buildings. So, we did that.
When you say fire station, you mean the actual station itself, not the
Yeah.
living quarters, the
No,
offices attached
all
to
of
it.
that. All of that is considered because in the office, the living quarters is where you've got to get them there safely. The admin area, lots of times you've got your fire communications and all of your other essential facilities. So they're all supported, so it's in the entire station that has to meet that.
Are you including this wing as part of the fire station?
Yes.
Yes.
So we have to, find a place for community development, council chambers, things like that.
And that's one thing that you need to be aware of when we get done with this number that we have at the very bottom. That does address where you can put the community development offices. We have not addressed that issue.
So this is bringing the building up to code and ADA, including this part of the building,
Yes.
and then basically putting it back to the way it was before. You're bringing it up to code, and then it's gonna be code and ADA compliant,
Yes.
but then that's.
And redesign
And-
for the fire stations.
Reconfigure.
The code issues and functionality issues associated with the stations that currently exist basically mandates that we change that, and the floor space that we have to do that in is this one. And so the intent there would be to bring make the building, both the fire station and the fire headquarters, and meet all of the requirements associated with those to meet the current code as an essential facility.
Well, you put a number in there for a remodel of sorts as far as putting the dorms, rooms here,
Yes.
bathroom
Yes.
facilities over here, administrative office here. Obviously you haven't created a floor plan or anything like that, but that, you just kind of gave us a ballpark figure on
And what we did is we know how big the area is, and we know how much those types of facilities cost per square foot. And so we plugged those values in, and those comes out of the mean reference.
So back to your other slide. The stuff on the right describes those changes that we just asked you about.
Yes.
That's right. Okay.
So for example, item 4, you can't read it here, but I can tell you what it is. This talks about remodel work that's required to get functional facilities for the fire department, both in the fire, the equipment bays themselves, and also the administrative sleeping quarters and support spaces, et cetera. Item 5 is to construct required fire barrier walls between the equipment bays, apparatus bays, and the balance of the building, which currently doesn't exist. This is adding fire sprinklers, so the building is supposed to have fire sprinklers, which it does not. Item 7 is replace the roof. I think that's where we have an overlap, isn't it?
No, I don't have a replacement.
Okay, all right, so I give you a dollar value for it to replace the roof. Repair and paint interior painted surfaces, that's obvious. HVAC systems, but Stephen has that elsewhere in the report, and so that's, and what we're looking at is given the reconfiguration of the space, it's gonna require essentially a whole new mechanical system to meet that.
So this doesn't include future growth, correct? This is just straight up
As it is.
as is.
Well, again, that's beyond the purview of this report. My expectation is that you should develop space in this wing that will accommodate some future growth. Not in the equipment, the apparatus bays are what they are, and we'd have to construct new to expose. The support, administrative, and sleeping spaces, depending on how you configure, what you determine how small an office chief is willing to live in, and how many offices you can get, how big a sleeping space you want to have, do you want to do individual rooms, how you want to do that, has a big impact on how much space is required. In evaluating what they're using now and the space available in this wing, my sense of it is that there's going to be space for a moderately sized training room, multiple room like this. And the balance of the space would be dedicated to current and immediate future needs.
Does your estimate show how long it would render the building unused in order to do all of this? It's like it can be done in some phases here.
No, we didn't put a time on it.
Just costs.
Can I make a comment? Really appreciate the way they've taken this and put this together. And I think that they have projected out this usage for 25 to 50 years. One of the things, though, that is outside of the purview of their evaluation is what happens to this area during that 25 to 50 years. What happens to 100 East? Does it widen or get smaller? There are certain spaces that we're going to be able to actually make some changes to and really make some big improvements. But as he stated, there is no room, or at least there's no allowances in the study to change, say, the apparatus floors. Right now, as the apparatus clears the building and gets view of 100 East, they're already in traffic.
Right.
And so there exists now and would exist afterwards.
Right.
And it doesn't take into
That's what we need to work with our PSB committee on, looking at. You've got a bottom line figure, and I think it was 3 point what?
3.289.
3.289 to gut and refurb these two buildings together to make them usable, but it does not address the growth. It does not address setback. It doesn't address some of the programming things that we need to sit down together as a team and kind of work through. There's a trade-off, right? There's a trade-off between spending 3 point whatever and doing this, and what is that other option that we're looking at? And so I think this is input into another process.
And is
Does
this
this
just
include soft costs of the fire station? I want to be able
I
to
don't think there's
compare
any soft
apples to
costs.
apples with numbers we've had before. This is just structure.
No, this is overall cost. It embodies what it takes to do the project.
Right, when she says soft costs, we're looking at the things that an occupant would normally provide, like desks and chairs and.
When we talk about soft cost relative to construction, we're mostly talking about design fees, inspection fees, soil reports, and so forth as soft costs that would be embodied, and those are embodied in these estimates.
But not facilitating.
Yeah, in other words, what you're talking about is what we call FF&E, furnishings, fixtures, and equipment.
Right.
And that, I don't think is reflected in these numbers.
So there's no FF&E in here, furniture, fixtures, and equipment.
Does it do the lots and does it do the replacement of sewage or anything like that?
There's money in there for plumbing, there's money for redoing electrical, and money for redoing the HVAC system.
How about this parking lot that we drive?
No,
here at?
no, no, wouldn't include an exterior surface improvements. Would not be included.
The cost, for example, of adding fire sprinklers doesn't cost of a sprinkler service in the building. But that's assuming that there's appropriate water supplies available in the street.
Right, so assuming that's available, it does consider riser
Yes.
and plumbing for the.
Yes. And if you have to go 800 feet or a quarter mile or something to pick up, then it's not.
So like here, oh, where was your fire? There's a, install fire sprinklers throughout the building. It's got $78,000 there. So fire alarm system, got another $40,000. But they explaining, that assumes that.
Again, these prices also, there's a, part of the consideration of the cost is how much you're doing together. If you do this all together, the net price for each piece is lower than if you piecemeal it.
So you're looking at mobilization costs.
The mobilization cost, well, the putback costs. For example, if you were to do a bunch of sprinklers and then come back and retrofit sprinklers, the cost of that could be double because you're having to go back into finished spaces and run the pipe in, install the heads, et cetera, and so forth.
Do you anticipate, this is not probably part of your report, but this type of retrofitting, can the building be occupied and continue to be in service while part of the building is being worked on? So like we do this.
At full
He's
function.
leaning forward in his chair, getting closer to the mic. Okay, I'll stop. Thanks.
When you go through and do that, that's the keeping the building occupiable at the same time that it's functional. There are if you spend the time figuring it out, there's lots of things that can be done. So it's would not be easy. I mean, how do you move the sleeping quarters from upstairs because of the proposed location? Because we want to keep the sleeping quarters right next to the apparatus space. That means you've got to, so temporarily, you're gonna have to have it located somewhere, because when you do that, we're gonna tear that mezzanine out and re-roof them downstairs. So there's gonna be some disruptions.
Well, I guess.
Can you make accommodations for it and put a trailer outside with sleeping quarters in it during that part of the renovation? Possibly, yes.
I don't think I'm being clear. That's fine.
No, I think.
What I'm asking is not a finite question. It's not something that you've studied and put in our report. It's, you've done this kind of work before. We're talking about emptying out this part of the building so it's not being used by the current use. Can this be worked on empty?
Yes.
Move into it and then work on
Yes.
what's over there?
Yes.
So our people can remain working
Yes.
without being out in a trailer or in a hotel room. Again, the answer is yes, with conditions.
That's fine,
Consequences.
yeah, but you didn't give me a, oh no.
But let me explain what,
Almost.
we have done this a number of times, and the question frequently comes up. That cities want to keep spaces in service. It always adds time and complexity, it always adds cost. And it always comes with unforeseen consequences. For example, you can't, well, we're doing the seismic work in the apparatus bays will be out of service. Where are you gonna put your apparatus? And where we put it, that's where the firemen are gonna need to be. And that hasn't been addressed, but again, that's part of the domino effect when you start the project. You say that if you decide to keep the building in service as a fire station, the fastest way and the cheapest way to get it done is to come in and just do it all at once.
So move the people out, move the equipment out, gut the building, redo it, and then move everybody back.
That's the fastest, least expensive way to do it.
Okay.
Consequence of having to find temporary quarters for the apparatus.
And that's the 3.2.
Yes.
Answered my question.
I'm glad.
What have some other cities done to house their public safety personnel possibly involved?
It really depends on the city, what other facilities they have available. If you have facilities that have 15 stations, it's easy to redistribute people between those other stations.
What if you don't?
If you don't, if you have one station, then you gotta find temporary quarters. And you could do that a number of ways, but
Some cities have used other neighboring cities and have been able to use their facilities.
But there's a cost associated with that, I'm assuming.
there's always a cost associated.
But have-
And there's probably a level of service issue too. Response time you might get longer.
But you might choose to keep, say, if there was a warehouse available that you could put your people in temporarily to meet the local need, at least partial need. That's an option that you could look at. Again, there's so many ways to address. These are, what your options are, what your availability is.
And I think though at a high level, what we're saying is 3.2 assumes you have free access to the buildings
Yes.
and the whole thing gets retroed at the same time.
Yes.
And none of the costs of keeping the department operating and housed somewhere are considered in the
Correct.
2.2. Thank you.
And how long does this take to do it all at once? A month?
The fastest we've done, and you would pay a premium for this, would be about 1.5 years. You'd have about 6 months of design and about 1 year's worth of construction.
What about new construction?
New construction would probably be about the same.
And just say one thing, so I'm a numbers guy, and I'm looking at the numbers here, and I think that could cause some confusion for people that are gonna be reviewing that. And what I'm seeing, just looking at the numbers, is your mean numbers, sometimes they, on table 1 jump. And so I'm just wondering if you can make sure that they add up.
So,
somehow.
so
They jump
let's
to the
talk
lowest,
about.
and then they jump to the upper, and then
Yeah.
they jump to the
So
mean, and how you're doing that.
So I haven't got to that part yet, so let's
Okay.
talk about that question now, okay? The numbers that you see from here up get translated to the table differently than they do from here down, okay?
That's true.
Okay, and so that, and then that's, and I'll explain to you my logic. You can take what's worth, and if we need to revise this, we can, but I'll explain to you what we've done. For the costs that are there, we looked at, again, we said, okay, all of the buildings, we're gonna make these buildings last 25 to 50 years in the future. Plumbing systems are gonna need to be, they're outdated, need to be done. AC systems, those systems are out of date, and they need to be upgraded. If we're gonna spend the money on the building, let's make it work for the next 50 years, right? Same for electrical. So while we're doing this retrofit, we're gonna want to address these items, okay? For these, what we did is we went to the RS beams, their square foot cost for new facilities. They identify in they have a 1/4 percentile, a mean, and a 3/4 percentile. That means is that when they go out and they do the construction cost, they look at it, 25% of the new buildings will cost that amount or less. The mean, 50% of the new buildings will cost that much or less. And then the 3/4 of the buildings will cost that much or less. Okay? So is that, and
It
so.
graduates from left to right, most of them fall in the middle.
So what I chose to do for this table is when I came over here and I added these up, there's no reason that you couldn't take this number and slide it over here and add those up. And so there's lots of ways you can do this. Now, I did not pick the 1/4. We're dealing with existing buildings. Existing buildings are more complicated to work with, and that adds a construction, that adds a cost to those buildings. And so what I chose to do is at the low end with the life safety, I chose to make the median cost be that one. For the occupancy, I chose the 3/4 mean. Okay, now you could say that, hey, I think that we don't need to spend that much on the fire station, and I think we can use this number with that number instead. Okay, so that would be a reasonable thing to do. But we're saying, hey, the fire station, we think that it makes sense because it's a more complicated building, it's a more involved building. They're dealing with existing conditions. I used some judgment there to put that number in line there. And so that was my logic there. So go ahead.
So if, I'm not a construction guy, I'm a numbers guy. If 3/4 of the buildings fall within that upper range, there's still 25% that exceed that.
Yes, that's correct.
So that's, I mean, is that 25% because they, have marble floors and everything
Yes.
like that? Or, I mean, what?
Yeah.
Is that
You've picked some features to make the place extra nice.
Okay.
Okay. It'd be like a Class A office versus a Class C office, right? Okay, you're using different levels of finishes, different architectural appearances. You've got waterfalls inside the building, whatever. So
numbers on both above and below the line here are all adjusted to 2018, is that right?
yes, they are. I did a little different from in that, again, a judgment factor. When you take the mean numbers for the nation, in Utah, we're at 89% of the mean number. And so rather than forecasting those numbers out, I chose not to multiply those numbers by the local factor. And that works out to about identical to the same number. When you forecast out 3 years, they work out to be the same. So that's how I came to that.
Right.
So these would be all forecast out to 2018. And so that's where, like I said, you could, if you wanted, like, for example, the rec center, and you thought, hey, we're gonna do a life safety retrofit for it, but we really want it to be really nice finishes, you could choose to use the 3/4 for it.
Right.
Okay. So those numbers are, like I said, they are separate. The one thing different is you'll see on the architectural, that number, I don't have that variation there.
And we just did our best to do an appropriate budgetary number for each one. We got built into his system and we don't. And just trying to get a reasonable and appropriate budget for each.
So it looks like this is more of a range. It would
Yes.
be somewhere between the median and 3/4
Yes.
for this particular project.
That's it. The other thing that happens, and my mic died, I apologize. One thing that
Here's
happens.
another We have 7.
One of the things that happens is you hire an architect, a volunteer, and you say, this is our scope of work, this is our budget. We need to meet this minimum level of operational requirements. These are the things we'd like to add if we can afford it, to design to that budget. Now, the expectation is that you've done your due diligence, you hired somebody who knows what they're doing, and they've programmed this out so that the scope of work, the things that you want, are appropriate to your budget. And then the architect designs to that budget. And so when you talk about numbers here, you may say, you know what, all we can afford is a bare bones fire station. Sorry, chief.
Thank goodness the citizens of Pleasant Grove love us so much they would prefer not to do that.
But if that were the case, then you design for that. But a more appropriate and complete design that meets current and projected needs would meet then to that, that 3/4 percentile. And that's, again, routinely said here and told, here's our budget, here's our scope, here's our priorities, designed for that.
Brian, I think though that, again, the takeaway, just summing and coming back to the takeaway here. What we asked you to do was judge seismic capability and retrofits that need to be done to make this place usable.
Yes.
You've given us a range of 2.4 to 3.2 as far as what that might be. So that's a starting point. And it doesn't include housing or maintaining operations for the 18 months to 2 years that it takes to get this work done.
And it
Those
doesn't
other
include a
costs
new
have-
community center.
Pardon me?
It doesn't commute.
It doesn't take care of community development,
Right.
just retrofitting this building to make it usable,
Unless they become the occupants of the seminary building.
which
it does.
is absolutely a possibility.
Do you have a general number that you use for percentage for FF&E? Or is that different depending on type of building that you're doing?
That varies an extraordinary amount.
So we actually have other estimates for FF&E. They might be slightly different for this particular configuration, but yeah, we've had twice now where we've had those estimates.
And I remember that it was close to 20%. I don't know if it would be the same for remodel or whatnot. So no FF&E, no exterior surface improvement. So any upgrades to parking or the exterior of the building.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
And when you repurpose this, the storage down in the basement probably should not stay there. In fact, I see probably it has to go. So you're gonna have to fund a spot for that. Now, we haven't repurposed that basement for any purpose. Maybe there's a useful function that could go down there. We talked about putting the community development office down in the basement, but you don't have access. There's lots of problems with
There's
doing
no
that.
windows.
The fire department does need some substantial storage, and they've got their shoehorn storage in where they could, in between rafters and so forth. And I think that would be an appropriate place for their extended storage.
Is that included with the?
Yes.
So can you give me a few examples of what we would have different between a life safety and an immediate occupancy here in the fire station? I mean, generators would be one, right? That's an example of something different. What else is included in the upgrade from one standard to the next?
For example, from a seismic, what we do to make it immediate occupancy, we design for higher earthquake forces. Okay, that's one of the things that we do. We design typically for about at least 50% higher earthquake forces.
Okay.
So that's where a lot of that additional cost comes from, because you're making sure that it can handle, the average building, you want it to be able to handle the biggest earthquake.
Can you give us an example, like on scale of number?
Oh, it would be a 50% larger number, so you'd be going from, well, yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
You'd be going from a 6.5 to 7.5.
So it sounds like in one case you're not alive,
Yes.
but you don't come back.
And the
second
fire
case-
equipment doesn't go out.
Yeah, in the second case, not only can you walk out alive, you come back and use
Yes.
use the facility.
And the reason that a fire station and other essential facilities have that allowance on them for higher performance is because the lives of many hundreds or even thousands of people in a major earthquake depend upon the people and the apparatus in this building.
Right.
They are killed, disabled, or trapped, either people or equipment. They cannot serve the people in need of the community.
Right.
Tell me how you came up with your square footage cost there. From the bottom line.
Oh, the very bottom line?
Yeah.
Revision of the
They just
grant.
So ask that again.
How you came up with your square foot cost?
Oh.
Square foot.
Yeah, we just took this total number here. We've got, if you go in the report, we have the square footage for each building.
You have it on there, up there on the top.
Yeah.
Right under the fire station. It's square footage. 17,605.
Oh, yes, I got that. Yeah, okay, thank you. It's been a while since I put together, I forgot I had that on there.
That number divided by that.
Yes. Yeah, so that's where that's. Now, there's some flexibility because that 17,605 includes the basement.
What's the height of the basement down there? And you full height, is it full height?
Yeah.
7 feet?
But there's a ramp, no, it's 8 feet or more.
Yes, and take them out
I'm
of,
envisioning.
take them out of from the
Theater
Christensen
kids.
Theater and put it downstairs.
What about, this is, and no new bays, is that correct?
Correct.
What about, upgrading the facility, kitchen? I don't know if you've seen, and it's pretty tight, is that anything?
That's included in this portion of that
Okay,
project.
so if you over here. Okay.
They also get some, they get a room where they can watch TV and that they can walk out standing up.
That's always nice.
Excuse me, a question? Question, I could not read the square footage comment, what was it showing?
Down here for the fire station, we're looking at $183 per square foot.
Thank you.
And
So I think what you're doing is taking 17,605,
yes,
multiplying it by the cost per square foot, and you'd end up with 2.43 million on the left. Multiplied by 183, end up with 3.229 on the right.
yeah, we took those two numbers and divided it by
Should be
that.
something like that.
You get the square foot from the other numbers.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
mathematically.
like, yeah,
But
if you
people
go
see
here,
mathematically it's the same.
yeah, you'll see here, we did do that. See, I've got a square foot number up here, and then you'll see here, I list items are.
Okay, so are we good? We get where the numbers are and how they move?
So,
Next,
so,
That's it, right?
that's,
we haven't discussed
oh, okay.
the other three.
Okay, so what I did here is I took out these two tables are in the report. But the same way that I developed the costs on each of these was done for the rec building. Now, as you go in, maybe it's worth talking about the report for a minute, so that you can find this information in here. What you'll find is that we have under each individual area, and in the final report, I'll actually put page numbers in the index. I didn't do that for the draft report, okay? But what we've done, the format of the report, we have the individual section, each one separate. The first part is a written structural evaluation where we describe things that we've just gone through. Then there's a form which is from 150, because we did this according to the rapid visual inspection, where we came up with the Porter rating, because we needed to do that. There's a single page that shows that for each one of the buildings. It's a page. Now, yeah, I can, that's. It's,
I got one question while you're looking. You guys said you had experience in the past of earthquakes, seeing where earthquake aftermath was, something like that.
Yes.
Experience?
Absolutely. I'm a Southern California boy, so I lived through a number of them myself and visited others afterwards.
Okay, so when you went through, with the experience you have and went through all these buildings, did you see anything that looked like a sign where an earthquake could have damaged any of these buildings?
There was nothing obvious to me that everything that we saw, that I saw, appeared to be just time in place. And for example, on the rec center, the differential settlement at the south end of the building, none of that would be a seismic damage. On the Beck house, you've got some chimneys that are close to falling down in their upper reaches. They've been severely damaged by freeze-thaw effects. If there had been any seismic damage, those would have come down a long time ago. So,
Okay, because back in about 82, we had a fairly good earthquake here. And anybody that had the old water beds, some of you ended up on the floor through that. earthquake hit back in 82, so made it interesting when you get rolled out of the waterbed in the middle of that. So that was a pretty good one that hit. And so I was wondering if there was anything that maybe.
In these buildings where, do you know what magnitude that was?
I don't remember.
Which year was that?
Around 82
And that was where at?
here in Pleasant Grove.
Yeah, I would guess it would have been, it probably was around the 5. And see, we're looking at, and remember for, when they do earthquakes, when you go from a 5 to a 6, that's 100 times increase in energy. Okay, and you go from a 7 to, or a 6 to a 7, that's another 100 times increase in energy. And so there's a big difference when we talk about a 5. In this area, you could have as high as a 7.5. Likely one would probably be more like a 6.5, and those are significantly different. You know, I spent a lot of time with the seismic. I've been on the seismic committee for Structural Engineers Association for the past, it's been over 10 years, and spent a lot of time reading these. And so it's, when you hear a 5 and a 6.5, they're totally different in how much damage would be done. So that you got through a 5.
Well, I'm not sure what size.
It's 3.9.
3.9.
Yeah.
Okay. So a 3.9, then that's even. So you kind of a rule of thumb.
That's 1,000 times. That's 100 times less than a 5.
And you don't. You are in building up to about probably a 4 expected to do okay. 5, you're going to have some significant damage, and probably a 6 with the URM building, you'll be fairly severely destroyed.
To give you a visual, if you remember news photos from the earthquake in Santa Cruz, California, remember that the damage and the one death was all caused by the unreinforced masonry facades on the brick buildings on Main Street falling off, just falling out into the street. And so that's the kind of thing we're talking about for the most part in these buildings, is having that unreinforced masonry peel off and collapse. In the case of the fire station, because of the spans that are out here, we're talking about that would result in losing the roof probably that would come down on your apparatus. At the very least, if you lost the upper portions of your parapets, of your masonry walls, they would block, at least temporarily, the apparatus base from getting equipment out. Those are the kinds of effects, net effects we're talking about and trying to address.
Okay, with those, those parts still fall off the sidewalk.
Absolutely not.
Question, can you go to the graph of other building? The numbers?
Oh, yeah, table 1. I know that. I've got it right.
So let's just say if we had to move community development into the old seminary building, would you consider that IO column, because now we're housing administrative staff on 8 hours? No, okay. So we could go with
Business occupancies, would life safety is typically.
life safety, okay.
Yes.
And so that would be the $400,000 number, and that would mean that once that was your model with that number, they could be in there working, okay. But still not parking issues, or not addressing parking or exterior rooms like that, okay.
These are just the things themselves, the only things that we looked at.
Question. A minute ago, you had said the parapets would not fall down.
If we'd executed the improvements, the seismic improvements.
Okay, and that is what on the Richter scale would that cover up to? Is that like sort of 6.0 or 7.0?
Oh, they don't do it that way. The way it's done in the code now is by accelerations, ground acceleration, because that's what causes the damage. And so what does that equate to? What does the acceleration equate to?
Oh, the relations they have there. The Richter scale is what they report on the news and that, and what we use in structural engineers and design are based seismic maps that are developed by the USGS. And so we never use that terminology in design.
So the,
Boy, I've got it in a table somewhere, but it's buried.
okay, so then the
But
follow-up
I
would
can
be-
address that for you afterwards.
Okay, well, I guess a quick follow-up that might just, negate the need for the follow-up. Would this equate to something you would build for someone in California? In other words, it would withstand the same as California, or?
Depends on where in California, because again, we're using seismic maps, and each, for example, up at the state capitol, there's a fault that runs right through the hilltop there where the state capitol is. And so we had to design the work based on the accelerations that would be anticipated from that piece of real estate. Here, we look at the seismic map and design for the accelerations that would happen in this place. And it can vary quite a bit from here to there and over there. We don't use the zones we use at all. And so it becomes a moot point. You're asking apples and oranges type of questions.
Well, I guess the bottom line I would ask then is, as you talk about this retrofitting would be good for 50 years,
Yes.
but it's good for 50 years. You feel very confident that if whatever earthquake we might experience in Pleasant Grove, that this is being built to withstand the earthquake we would expect in Pleasant Grove.
Again, you're talking about which earthquake is gonna happen. That's, what we do is a design practice is we take what they figured the maximum credible earthquake is, and we scale that down, because most buildings you can't economically design to the maximum earthquake that possibly could happen. So what they do is they have what they actually call is the maximum credible earthquake.
And that would be the same whether it's a new building or a refurbished building?
Yes.
In other words, this would be just as good as a new building?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we would use a different design standard. We used, there are several codes that are directly addressed existing buildings, because you treat existing buildings differently than you treat new buildings. And so, for example, earlier, if you remember, I talked about the non-ductile columns that were in the fire bays. I talked about if we made the shear walls stiff enough,
That wouldn't be a problem.
that wouldn't be a problem. If you go to, and that's using a retrofit code that's designed for existing buildings. If you were to use the new building code is prescriptive. It just says, it's non-ductile, you can't do it. But there's performance-based codes, and they sometimes say, hey, if you do this right, there's not a performance issue.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick question on the AD compliance and any exceptions. I mean, in a fire department with the occupancy, I mean, there's certain physical requirements that the firemen have to meet. Hopefully, we hire them, and I feel that we do that, but we don't hire parapolice. So, I mean, is that, how did you?
There is
exception?
no exception.
So you went 100%, and I'm okay with that.
I don't even get exceptions for Air Force pilots.
Okay.
Give you an example. My first job out of college, I worked in California, and we worked next to Edwards Air Force Base. And I actually had to do a little bit of ADA training back then, Dave. So, and the guys explained to us and says, okay, you've got a helicopter, and they gave this as a little example. They said, hey, we've got a helicopter fighter pilot that we're doing for training purposes. Those guys, able-bodied. Guess what? The guy that was doing the training was a guy who got his legs blown off in Vietnam.
Sure.
And so they don't have that exception.
I just want to make sure that.
Yeah. They're.
So again, I just kind of want to put this in context. The purpose of this exercise, I think, has been to give us a ballpark idea of whether the buildings that we currently own are usable, or what it would take for us to make them usable for the purposes of which they were been used, for now. And so this gives us an estimate. It gives us an estimate of the actual cost just to do the refurb and retrofit. It doesn't include anything else. And this information now, I think helps us with the Public Safety Building Committee, look at that, look at the other things that would need to take place in order for us to make this accomplished, and compare that with other options that may or may not exist currently, such as new construction, doing nothing, you know, those kinds of large making. And then we start diving down into picking one and drilling into it and spanning it out. That's what I kind of envision happening with this information. Had you come back in and said, this particular building is a particular hazard, there's no way to economically recover it, you need to cease and desist occupancy, then the council has a different issue on their hands. Completely different decision.
Your biggest single issue is the fire station, due to its essential as an essential facility. And so I think you do have that as probably your single biggest question. The other buildings are certainly, there's less priority. I would observe that there's less priority relative to the other buildings, but that your fire station would, I would get as quick attention as possible.
Does it currently make life safety? I know we want to get immediate occupancy, but for the safety of the firemen, does at least meet needs?
So numbers get up to life safety's doing here.
I mean, when you look at it.
2.43 or 2.44. Well, 2.4.
Yeah, but the plumbing HVAC, that's not life safety.
No.
So the essential structure, what costs it to be able to make sure our firemen are safe?
But you're saying if you go in and you are piecemealing as you go, we're gonna end up spending more money.
Absolutely.
You go in and do it all at once.
Well, and the other question here is, when you're talking about a fire station, life safety goes beyond obvious, there's code application issues, because you have the issues of can the firemen perform their duties at the efficiency necessary and safely in order to serve the community in emergency. And the approach we've taken here is that to reach that threshold, that it's a $3.2 million project.
I think your point's valid, and that's a discussion that we should have more internally as to whether or not life safety for right now involves changing out an HVAC.
I'm looking for a term like in the next 6 months, if we have an earthquake, are we going to die?
Yes.
Well, I think
that's a big question.
That's the short answer.
Structural, I mean, because everything else, if you don't do the seismic upgrades, the parapet falling outside the building is not going to kill them, but the building itself isn't going to fall down.
You would have severe damage. And again, it depends on which earthquake we have.
Can I just say, for the record, and for those listening on Facebook and whatever else, this is a public meeting. And some of the statements that we're making right now, as far as extrapolating, have severe ramifications. One reaches the public without the background of the full discussion. So I just want to kind of back up and say, the comment about firemen dying if we have a break, and therefore we better do something immediately, like tomorrow morning. Let's back away, okay?
It's not my turn.
Yeah, and let's just kind of look at this more from the perspective of, yeah, that's why we're having this discussion, which is to prevent that very thing from happening.
Thank you, that was not my intent.
Okay.
Rouse or anything else.
No problem, Matt. It's a good question. It's just.
What I didn't hear, maybe I just didn't hear it, was what was the rating of this building?
They were all poor.
All poor.
All poor, and the one that needs the most attention the soonest is this one. So if we were prioritizing, this would be the one.
All buildings were poor?
All four
All
buildings on
four
a
buildings.
4 point, very poor, fair, good, they're all tier 4.
Yeah, there's certain features that make them very poor, and these buildings didn't have those features that make them very poor. And now the other part of the equation is always, and we talked about this in our other meeting that we had earlier, what's the likelihood that we're gonna have an earthquake?
Who knows?
That's,
In geological time, we're past due, but in day-to-day life, who knows?
you're actually a little better in Provo. Salt Lake's due right now. Brigham City is past due. Yours was more, the last big one was more recent down
I'm
there.
San Andreas, so as far as I'm concerned.
So, that's, we're plus or minus 500 years on Earth.
Okay, from a presentation perspective, have you gone over all the report that you wanted to?
Yeah. The only thing that would be, that we were getting ready to cover would be if you wanted me to go through, and we don't have to, would be to talk about how the report's formatted, but as you read through the report, you'll see how it's formatted.
I think what we'll do is we'll get the draft, which we have electronically. We'll get that on our website. We'll also send a copy of the draft to each of the members of the PSB committee. The council already has access. When will you be ready with your final report?
Well, what we're looking for is any feedback that you have into our report.
Okay.
So once we get feedback from you, we can probably turn that around within about a week.
And
As long as I'm on vacation.
what kind of feedback are you looking for?
If there is something that you want to see that we didn't address in the report, I've gone through, and if some of you guys are really good at math, I've actually, this table 1 right here is slightly different than the one you have in your report. I found it's okay for the other buildings, but the electrical cost on this table 1, I found a typo in the one that's in your draft report, and so.
That one's there.
So
is it significant dollar wise?
it was
$60,000.
Yeah.
It's a $60,000.
So I could really quickly, I could go back to my office tomorrow morning, update that
Okay.
and email
If
you a
update it,
new.
Send us a new draft.
Yes.
You know, we can review it in our sleep, and then we'll send it back to you. And then you guys can go ahead and write the final. In the meantime, let's get the revised draft, the one that has the correct number. Put that on the website, get a copy out to each member of the PSB so they can
Then
start.
we want to give them a chance to review and then meet before we send recommendations back to.
So the first meeting we have scheduled is the 12th of the.
Well, we haven't sent that out yet.
It went out, I think. Did you send it out today?
I just emailed you, seeing
Oh,
the
it's just
12th
me.
was
August 12th. August 12th.
It just went out just now.
It was the one that, that was the date that most of you were available.
Time.
Huh?
7.
Did you get a time? 7 PM?
The dates was 7 o'clock.
Oh, that's right, when you asked. 7 o'clock.
Okay.
So I'm just going to meet, get the report, analyze it as a group, we analyze it, ourselves and give it to council, and then give it to them.
Yeah.
Okay.
We could,
A little bit longer than
we can do that.
a week.
Are you really ready to put it out on the website without it being formatted and everything? Will it not cause more questions and confusion? Or is there a demand coming from the citizenry to hear this?
I mean, as long as people understand it's a draft, I've spent enough time with it that I feel comfortable with people looking at it.
Just having staff stamp draft
Yeah, I
over
saw it.
everything. Well,
It's organized.
Is that
my electronic.
we want to wait until all the questions have been answered? Before we put it on the website, confusion about what is which.
Because it says draft across the whole thing, people will know that it's a draft. The number is important to change. Let's all get it, review it, get our comments in so they can get a final, and then they can go ahead and send us back the final, and then we can change what's on the website.
So I think it'd be a turning point and really set the tone for the Public Safety Building Committee, how these numbers are
Okay.
to the public and the social media. And it'd be easy to go back and say, throw out 1.49 and 2.43 million, and so I'm just throwing that out that
I understand.
there's aren't included. There's a whole study behind this. We sat here for almost 3 hours. And I think it would be a huge disservice to now the third year in this process to have misinformation and calculations and the wrong information going out to the public on social media and otherwise about what's going on here. And I think it'll really set the tone moving forward for public safety building if it's not given the correct form, the correct context, correct comments. And so that's we've seen it happen in previous years, and it could be a huge disservice in the process that we're trying to do. And this is for people to come and spend away from their families and dedicate this to have something like that happen and thwart the process from day one.
What would be your recommendation so we can get in front of that and not create a problem before we publish information? You don't have an idea.
I would just put a page in there saying that you had the meeting with draft, it's for the committee, it'll be coming out at such and such a day.
Cover letter?
I mean, we have it on video. I mean, obviously with the presentation, what's happened, we can link that to the city website.
Okay.
The city needs to get on. I mean, I'm a little bit concerned putting it even on draft form because we just don't have all the information yet. I don't know if we just want to link just the video and say the actual report is coming after the committee has been able to do that along with the council and get those final estimates, because it does get confusing with draft and final. We can definitely get, like I said, the video out there.
Mayor. Part of that, I've just been taking note throughout here of all the things that this does not cover. Is that anywhere in your report, some of the things it does not, or is that something that would help contextualize it, that it does not include
Like
furniture,
disclaimers?
fixtures, equipment?
Last year.
No,
Amounts.
it's not comparable.
And we need to be able to, we need to let the public know that it doesn't have some cost and parking. It's not comparable to other money amounts that we've seen in the past. I think that's important.
I can easily, in this update, on this table 1, we can add some footnotes, some additional footnotes at the bottom of this that would say this doesn't include equipment, it doesn't include the disruption cost that could occur, it doesn't include any site improvements.
Doesn't include where city council chambers would go.
Yes.
Things like that.
Yeah.
The
So-
disclaimer that if you did it in state, it would be more expensive and all that.
And the other thing I'll add on here is a big note that this is ballpark numbers. You get that if you read the report, but the fear is with this table 1, that's the only thing that anybody will ever look at with that. And so,
They're just gonna.
Right.
Sure to get page 11.
But it's not a reason for us to not publish information.
yeah, but we can add a note to table 1 that
I think
says.
adding the note, the disclaimer notes, can you email those? Okay, if you'll email them to me, then I'll make sure that Scott gets it and we'll make sure that gets included in the, like right in the front. Some disclaimer, disclaimer statement about what you really are looking at here.
Well, and I think Dean had an apples to apples list of options that were included before.
Well, when we did the MOCA exercise
Well,
last year.
and the different parties. We had Springville, so I remember there was a apples to apples comparison sheet that we.
Well, that was for the previous, right, and I think the comment here is this is not comparable to that.
Right, but on that list, there were line items of what the categories that this would not include.
Okay.
So
I think I
in
understand what
addition
you're
to Larry.
So do you want to do that? So you want to do that, then you're volunteering.
No, I think I may have it.
Well, I know what you're saying, and we can add that on there.
One of the
I think it was just to make sure
Larry,
that
one that I'd love
in
to see
addition
on
to
there
this.
is a note on this very page of the table, that these are 2018 numbers, not 2015 numbers.
Okay.
If I may make a.
Yes,
observation.
please.
as we're talking about this, our recommendation, I think, was pretty emphatic that we do immediate occupancy for the fire station. But that we don't see a reason to do an immediate occupancy on the other three buildings.
Right.
Unless you do. Would it simplify this for the purpose of public understanding to only show the numbers relating to those approaches?
What do you guys think?
I like having the full table, because even though I understand the recommendations are very strong, there's not a legal obligation to have our fire department on the immediate occupancy standard. And we could come to the conclusion as a policy matter that we aren't gonna have a command center in the fire station as long as they can get out and start to serve the public. Ultimately, it's a decision of policymaking body what standard we do apply with. Is that right?
Well, I could, for example, we could gray out, so you could still read the numbers, but we could gray out the ones that.
The non-recommend.
Yes.
I think that's an excellent idea.
Good.
But I guess between what's life-saving and what's immediate occupancy, and based on professional recommendation, life-saving services such as police, fire, public safety are immediate occupancy, and people are gonna gravitate towards the lowest number, but not understanding what the ramifications of that are.
I believe it says that in the report. It doesn't say that in the
But-
report.
Yeah. On page 2.
On page 4.
Just saying if we're creating something with 55 disclaimers on it, I think we might end up
They won't.
Reading
be-
the report.
And that's why I'm wondering if we just, as he suggested, doing the columns that we are going to be basing our actual decisions off of, instead of just throwing this all into the mix.
Just throw the chart up there, just throw the whole thing in.
Yeah, I'd like the grayed out suggestion, because it gives us more, it shows the amount of work you guys have done. It gives us more information, but we see clearly the recommendation.
And don't gray out anything. Just put it up.
So do we have recommendations from our?
I, as a citizen, I must have been out of the loop somewhere. Coming here tonight, I'm sitting there looking, I was only coming to think we're discussing the fire station. I'd like to, I'm a regular citizen out there, also I'm seeing the old LDS seminary building and the Beck home. I'm going, where did this come into the picture here? And I'd be confused as a citizen where, like I am tonight, saying, where did all 4 of these come into the picture? 'Cause
And why?
I missed something. And so I'm in a confused state still. It's like something's been planned that I didn't have an idea what this planning was going right now. And so I'm a confused
That's a
state
good
right
point.
That's a really good
Let me explain it for the audience that's gonna look at this video sometime maybe. Anticipating that one of the possibilities is reconstruction and reuse of this facility for the fire. If that's one of the options that we could do, then you need to get rid of the use that's already in here, which is community development. We're gonna do them, right? They need to go somewhere. So then you start looking at what other assets does the city have to be able to put them in. Well, let's just throw out the possibility they could maybe go into the seminary building if it was remodeled and used for offices. Okay, so then that needs to be studied. Of what do we need to do to make this building safe, right? Then thought would be, okay, we've also had some concerns raised previously about space and flow for courts and for police. So what is the condition of that thing there, and how do we give them space? Well, one of the ways is to have administration move out. Kick out City Hall and turn that building over just to courts and police. If you do that, where do you put these people? Well, the next logical thing is there's a building on the corner that's not being used, but can we use it? What's the condition of that building? And it also answers a whole bunch of questions that have floated through the community for at least 15 years about why we have a vacant house corner that's not being used. So let's study that one as well. So that's where this came from. And then the other one was, we have a building here that's historic. People in the city have mixed feelings about whether that should stand, whether it should come down, whether it should be restored. Okay, so what is the condition of this building and what do we need to do? That's the genesis for getting a third-party consulting group, engineering, to take a look at the seismic and then the architectural piece advise us as to what those conditions are. And that's a prelude to taking this information and giving it to this committee so that part of our discussion is, okay, here's some information that gives you options with numbers attached to those options. You go down this path, starting points that we can look at.
Is that, you just explain it like I think everybody needs to hear it.
Okay, there you go. Steve.
You know what, I mean, I like what the architects were saying about the highest number possible that he's using, and then trying to find out, I mean, I don't have a problem going with the highest numbers on all of them. And we as a committee, and I think as a community, are gonna try to do our best to meet that budget or come under.
Right.
And nothing's line item accountable in all. If we go with the highest number on the seminary bill, we find out, you know, we really don't need to do that. We can apply that to the fire if they do want a water ball.
Right.
And so that, I mean,
Yeah. I think that the job that takes place
why don't you
here
go with the highest calculated number?
is made simpler by providing the data. And then you have the data so that you can look at the data and make some decisions based on it. Warren.
Yeah, I was just curious, now that we walked ourselves through a second time on the, all these buildings, why wasn't City Hall addressed in this? Can you explain that?
The building is much, the condition of the building appears to be very good. It didn't seem like we needed a seismic analysis of that building, which is what the initial.
But if it be all police station, that's emergency responders again.
Different
Is,
issue.
is there still an assumption that we would have to do something to raise the standard
Right.
over there?
A
if that
different
became
issue,
complete?
which has not been looked at. And I think that in and of itself requires more than what we had even asked them to do with the 4 buildings. We just asked for current use. What is it gonna take?
How old is that building?
1977, I think, was the original, and then there was an add-on in the early 80s.
That's a great question, Warren. If that building doesn't have generators, it's not immediate occupancy.
It does have a generator on the side of the building. Yeah, so your point is valid, and I think it involves much more than.
But it is a different,
seismic
it's,
or-
it's a different kind of look at that.
It's a different, port's too small, it's gotta be blown out, the flow is wrong, there's a lot of things there that have to change. Okay, Frank?
Mayor, a lot of the, and your initial question to us was based on, you know, if we publish this information, how will it be used and what should we show? And I think the reality is the public will do with these numbers, no matter how many footnotes you're going to do with them, what they will.
Right.
I think it's important that we as a committee, and I personally would take this position, we don't discuss these numbers until we've gone through, and as a committee, because that's the whole point of this committee, is come up with something we can all agree on.
Does that mean we don't publish the
No,
numbers?
no,
until
I'm
then?
just saying
Okay.
publish them, because not publishing would be even worse, right? 'Cause
Right, I think so.
Yeah, but rather than worry about infinite number of footnotes or trying to control what the public might choose to do with them, the important part is as a committee, that we don't participate in it, that we are working as a committee. And
Can
we're
you
going
guys
to
do
work-
that? Are you guys okay with? Like you'll have the information, but not discussing it out in public, in any kind of a public way? Just keeping it amongst yourselves for, you know, reviewing and refining and then putting the information? Are you
Do you mean general or specifics, like numbers, or generally we're looking at retrofitting all the buildings?
That's fine. That's fine. Just like Randy said, that's fine.
I do think the footnote should be included, I mean, that.
And I think footnotes should be
There has to
included.
be-
I agree.
It's
The
not just,
disclaimers need to be
Yeah,
yeah, it's
included.
not
I
just throwing
agree.
out information,
Right.
it's, we have to organize in a way that's understandable and, you know, so to the public, which we even, like I said, listening here also 3 hours.
Right.
They're not gonna have that, so I
They won't have that benefit unless they watch this video.
And the majority of people are going to be curious and they'll look at it. I mean, the majority of people that will be curious and will look at it will understand that that's a whole lot of information and that they don't understand it. So I'm not afraid.
Okay.
It's
Other
like,
thoughts?
so we have the foundation, right? Misinformation gets out there, we still have the foundation, we still refer back. It is what it is.
Okay.
We know social media is.
Did you have another comment over here?
Larry, you had a comment.
Well, mine goes back to the concern a citizen may see this and say, oh, well, we've given up the idea of new construction. I think that's where the disconnect was. It's all of a sudden we're talking about remodeling. So I would again just add to what's in the cyberspace there was that then this committee can use this information as well as existing to discuss the merits of new construction versus old.
Right, there were two reasons for this, right? For several years, well before the time frame of discussing anything with public safety, there was this ominous fear that that rec center was going to collapse at any moment. And I think that's been a pervasive statement that's gone out through the public. One of the concerns we had, well, if that's the case, then we better be doing something about it. So going to get a professional opinion on what the condition of that facility was important. And I had the recommendation tonight come back and said, that's condemned, tear it down. That's a whole different issue that the city to deal with immediately. But where that's not the comment coming back, then that becomes input. Committee's resources to be able to say, here are several tools that can be incorporated into what we're trying to find.
He expressed the concern of, whoa, what are we, I think the citizens of the city may do that too. We've talked about new construction, now we're doing this. Is this off the table?
No,
so it's just.
So maybe we include that.
But Larry, that statement from you,
What's that?
I think that statement from you needs to be included
Okay, got that? Good.
in writing. So, I mean, this is gonna go live back in an hour, right? This is gonna be, Scott's gonna send out what's going on the website, we're all in agreement, or.
Well,
'Cause I want like a mayor-
let me
I want like a
recap.
mayor's message and.
Let me recap what I
don't think
understand
it's
how
gonna
we're
go
going.
in an hour. I think we need to write down the cover letter that goes with this thing that sits out on the website. It addresses the disclaimers, it addresses the questions, the obvious questions that we've had, and then we put it out there along with the video going out there, because the video's already out. I mean, it's out right now.
Yeah, but we can link it on the city
Right,
website.
you link it on the
And then
website.
when the final report comes back after changes have been made, we can update it at that point.
Okay, so that'll help.
I think that'll help.
Okay.
Okay, so if I understand, I'll be working on the cover letter and some of the disclaimer footnotes that we want to add. I'll be working with Stephen to have that implemented in the draft report. We will have another draft report and the latest draft report ready to go in a day or two. Now, and this report's quite large, so for those, can we still use your Dropbox, kind of how we did it?
Yeah, I can all do it.
So if you email me the link, I'll email that to everybody. So you'll need to go to the Dropbox and then download the actual report, because you can't email it, it's too big.
It's about 15 megabytes,
Yeah.
most emails will handle more than 10.
And then that's gonna give council time to look at it, the committee time to look at it. We're gonna give them a couple weeks, then they're gonna turn whatever feedback they do back to Stephen. He's gonna issue a final report a week after that, and then that's our final report.
Yep,
Is that how I
that sounds
understand it? And the draft report, once we get it ready and give the link to everybody, we will also put that on the website.
That sounds right.
Okay. I'm clear.
Okay, any other comments or questions or concerns?
Just as a matter of curiosity, the 2018 numbers, that's an assumption about when we would actually take action and when we would actually construct, right? I mean,
It's providing a reasonable window for determination. If you put this off 5 years, it changes the numbers. If you do it next week, it changes the numbers. What we've done is best practice from our standpoint, provide a reasonable projection within a reasonable window of time.
but if we were actually constructing, if we chose to do one of these options, would we be paying the dollars at the time that we began construction or at the conclusion of construction? What would the price be?
Lump sum bid would be at the beginning.
You'd have a graduated payment based on performance.
If it's a lump sum bid, it's whatever they bid it
So
out
this
at.
is an estimate, right? Not for planning purposes.
But you put
If
that
we
in.
decide to act on it, we have to get it bid out. And then we get real numbers that we would act on.
The price would be the day.
Correct.
You're gonna have another round of studies before this thing goes out. And in those other rounds of studies, through these and these numbers right now are fairly, like we've talked about, they're ballpark, they're loose. When you go through and do another level of study, then those numbers can be, well, it depends on, you can go through and do another study, or you could just decide and make up your mind and set a construction budget to be assigned to.
So maybe I'm not super clear about my question, but we would be bidding in 2018. It'd take us a few years to get to that
If,
one.
if you call us up tomorrow and say, you know what, we decided we want to do X, and we had 6 months to complete the designs, for you to take that to bid, so that January it went out to bid, for example. Then you would pay whatever, if it is an estimate of construction cost for that bidding window, it would be based on construction cost for that window.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, Randy.
The concern I have, like I was talking to him just a minute ago, is if the public looks at those figures up there and starts adding up the 4 different columns. If you go with the highest one, you're getting up to about $8 million to get all of them. And I just get panicky what they're gonna think when they see those type of $8 to $9 million just in that proposed.
Right. Our letter that we put out needs to state that we did a seismic evaluation to see what the condition of the city-owned facilities were and what it would take to bring them up to, if we needed to use them, put them into service for some or part of the city's use. This is not a statement that we're going out to do these things. They're just for input into the process. That help?
All right.
Okay. Anybody else? You awake back there, Steve? Thank you. Okay, any other comments?
How about you guys? Will we have access to the A&E team maybe for the first few, so some of these things can be ironed out?
Yeah, I'm thinking, you mean these two guys?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm thinking that when we start getting into our meeting schedule, that we'll have access to them.
Because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be
Yeah,
cleared up.
a lot of things for questions for the committee, dive down into at a more committee level. Anything else?
Well, I just want to say thank you to the committee. I mean, this is our first meeting.
Get used to it.
Well, let's not put a damper on it yet. But I mean, just thank you for taking time away from your families and coming down to this process, because this is obviously very important to the city and a priority, and we need your help. So thank you.
Do you generally feel like we're off to a better start than we've had before?
Absolutely.
You think?
Yes.
Okay.
Did we get a chance to introduce everyone?
No.
They introduced themselves at the beginning.
Oh, the very beginning.
Right before. No, you came. They introduced themselves.
Just a couple came later.
Oh, just a couple, okay. And it's all blurred at this point. So.
It was 3 hours ago.
Yeah, Dave.
Would it be beneficial, Tony, do you remember the document I put together like January-ish and sent to just you about the fire department or fire station spaces?
The programming document?
Yeah,
I think that needs to be.
I was gonna say, would that be helpful for me to send that to
Can we,
them? So they can
I
look
would
at it?
prefer we get it all, because I've gotten 1,000 minutes too. I'm sure that these guys are gonna want to review. I almost wonder if we package it and then we sit down and have a meeting where we go over all.
We can even create a Dropbox so
Something
that
like that, yes.
this committee has access to a common place where all of this paper is contained, so you don't have to make paper. You can actually read
I'm
it.
just saying, if we start shooting them one-offs on what we've put in the last 3 years, that might get the, let's just kind of go.
So yes,
I'll
it's
send my
useful.
stuff to you.
Yeah.
And then package it, okay?
Anything else? All right, thank you for coming. We appreciate the initial report. We need a motion to adjourn.
Another motion.
Yeah.